The phone buzzed once in the dark, just enough to wake the screen. On it glowed a single line of text, an email confirmation, time-stamped 2:07 a.m. Your ride with Uber has been completed, but the problem was simple. The woman it was sent to was already dead. Outside, police lights painted the narrow suburban street in fractured blue. Rain clung to the asphalt like mercury. Officers moved quietly, their radios low, their voices lower. Inside, in a house that smelled of lavender and iron, 31-year-old Emily Sanderson lay on the kitchen floor. No forced entry, no defensive wounds, just silence and the faint hum of a refrigerator beside a half-eaten piece of cake. The detectives would later say it was the calmest crime scene they'd ever seen. A scene that looked more like surrender than violence. Her husband, David, sat 3 blocks away in a parked car, hands trembling around a coffee he hadn't ordered. He'd already given his statement, too rehearsed, too careful. He said he'd been at a business dinner until midnight, then a hotel bar, then home at 2:30. He said she was asleep when he got in. It sounded airtight, until 2 days later her sister opened Emily's email to cancel her subscriptions and saw the Uber receipt. A drop-off address 3 miles from the Sanderson home, a route that started at 2:07 a.m., exactly when David said he was asleep beside her. That single digital line, so ordinary, so routine, was about to dismantle a perfect alibi and reveal what really happened in those missing 23 minutes. The morning light in Willow Creek had a kind of politeness to it. Soft, filtered through oak trees and wide kitchen windows. It was the kind of neighborhood where lawns were trimmed even in winter, and front doors stayed unlocked until dusk. Emily Sanderson fit right into that quiet order. 31, a middle school art teacher, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, brought muffins to faculty meetings, and still wrote thank you cards by hand. Her world was a collage of color and calm, ceramic coffee mugs she made herself, a garden that bloomed in time-lapse across her phone's camera roll, and a marriage that, at least from the outside, looked enviably stable. Her husband, David, was older by 6 years, a systems engineer at a cybersecurity firm downtown, quiet, clean, meticulous, the kind of man who ironed even his gym clothes. They met 5 years earlier at a gallery opening, bonded over a shared love for old cameras. By the second date, he'd told her he never believed in accidents. Everything, he said, was data and decision. At the time, she'd found that romantic. But love stories built on control always start beautifully. Their friends described them as opposites that made sense. Emily was warmth, David structure, but under that balance lived a quiet tension, the kind that doesn't break suddenly but corrodes slowly, invisible. In her last journal entry, dated 6 days before her death, Emily wrote, "He counts everything, minutes, words, even smiles. Sometimes I feel like a number waiting to round down." Still, she smiled through it. The neighbors saw her jogging with their dog, Luna, every evening at 7. She'd wave at the same joggers, pause to pick up mail, and disappear inside before the porch light flickered on. Nothing about her life looked like a woman preparing to vanish. The first contradiction came from the dinner invitation. That Friday, Emily had hosted her sister Nicole and her husband for a late meal, pasta, red wine, quiet music. She'd texted Nicole at 5:30, "Dinner's still on, right? David's been distant all week, but maybe food will soften him." Nicole replied, "Always works." Dinner went smoothly enough. Emily laughed. David smiled at all the right moments. But later, as they were leaving, Nicole remembered how Emily's eyes shifted toward the clock again and again, like someone waiting for a signal only she could hear. When Nicole hugged her goodbye, Emily held on a little longer than usual. "Text me when you're home," she whispered. Nicole never forgot that tone. Saturday came and went without incident. On Sunday, Emily didn't show up for her usual brunch with friends. They assumed she was resting. By Monday morning, she hadn't answered messages. At 10:42 a.m., a neighbor called police reporting an open side door and a barking dog. Officers arrived to find no sign of struggle, only silence. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as acute respiratory failure, complicated by sedatives found in her bloodstream. There were no bruises, no signs of restraint. It looked like suicide, but 2 details broke that narrative. First, there was no prescription for the drug in her medical records. Second, The dosage was precise, exactly 200 milligrams dissolved into a glass of red wine. Too clean for panic, too deliberate for despair. David told police he'd been at a company dinner from 8 to midnight, then at a nearby bar with colleagues until after 2. Several confirmed his presence. Surveillance footage showed him laughing, drinking, paying the bill at 1:52 a.m. Then he claimed he drove straight home. He said Emily was already asleep when he arrived. He said they'd been working through things, but she'd seemed calmer that week. He spoke softly, answered every question, and even offered to take a polygraph. He passed. For investigators, it was over. Case closed, until Nicole came across that email. It was Tuesday morning when she logged into Emily's account, hoping to download photos for the memorial. The inbox was quiet. Work emails, delivery confirmations, a few from parents at school. Then she saw it. Uber. Your ride with Jamal has been completed. Time 2:07 a.m. Pickup. Sanderson residence. Drop-off 93 Holloway Street. Nicole froze. Holloway Street wasn't anywhere Emily should have been. It was an industrial district near the train tracks. Empty at night. Nothing but warehouses and repair shops. She called the police immediately. Detective Renee called her. Assigned to the original investigation, reopened the file. She requested Uber's trip logs and GPS data. The driver, a man named Jamal Ortiz, confirmed the trip. She was quiet, he said. Kind of nervous. Said she needed to pick up something from a friend's place. Asked me to wait with the engine running. He remembered the address clearly because of the way she said it. Careful. Rehearsed, she told me twice. Holloway Street. By the red door. When asked if anyone met her there, Jamal shook his head. No, she went inside alone. Came out 5 minutes later holding a small black bag. Then asked me to take her home. The ride ended at 2:29 a.m., except she never made it home. Investigators cross-referenced the drop-off address with local business records. The building belonged to a storage facility leased under Sanderson Technologies LLC, David's company. Inside Unit 14B, officers found computer servers, prototype devices, and one small, sealed box labeled, "Personal, do not remove." When opened, it contained a collection of flash drives and an old cell phone, wrapped in a towel. Forensic technicians extracted the phone data. Its final outgoing message, unsent, read, "If anything happens to me, look at his projects. It's not just work." From that moment, everything changed. The case that once seemed like a tragedy began to look like strategy, engineered misdirection. David's calm demeanor no longer looked like grief. It looked like rehearsal. Detective Calder studied their digital lives side by side, Emily's texts filled with hesitation. David's with control. When she texted, "Are you okay?" He'd reply, "You worry too much." When she wrote, "I miss the way we used to be," he'd respond, "Nothing's changed. You just overthink." It was a script of gaslight and dismissal. Calder called Nicole in for another statement. Did she ever talk about leaving him? Nicole nodded. She said she had proof of something. Said she was going to confront him that weekend. She sounded ready. Proof of what? She didn't say. In the weeks that followed, Emily's personality began to reassemble through small things. Her sketchbooks, lesson plans, old voicemails. Each revealed fragments of a woman who'd stopped believing in coincidence. One journal entry dated 3 weeks before her death read, "He keeps 2 phones. One for work, one for projects. I think the second one isn't for work at all." She ended the note with a single unfinished line. "If he finds out I know." The pen had trailed off mid-sentence. Meanwhile, David's alibi held firm, until the Uber logs revealed another anomaly. Though Emily's phone had ordered the ride, it was paid for using his card. When asked about it, he smiled faintly. "We share accounts. I don't control her movements." Technically true, but the payment metadata told a different story. The order had been initiated not from her device, but from an iPad registered to his Apple ID, his work tablet. Someone had ordered that Uber under her name, but whether she ever took the ride became the first great mystery. That contradiction split the investigation in two. If Emily had truly left the house at 2:07 a.m., then David's alibi was impossible. He was already home when she went missing. If she hadn't left, then someone else used her account to stage the illusion of a ride, to build a timestamp, an alibi within an alibi. Detective Calder leaned toward the second theory. She'd seen precision like that before, not from grief but from guilt. A week later, search warrants unearthed something buried deep in David's digital network. Among encrypted backups of his work projects sat a hidden folder titled Echo. Records inside were hundreds of emails between him and a subcontractor known only as MK discussing data models for remote behavioral tracking. Calder read one line that chilled her. The prototype works. We can trigger GPS pings without device movement. He had built a system capable of simulating motion, including a fake Uber route. Still, motive matters. Investigators pieced together the financial threads. Months before her death, Emily had inherited her grandmother's estate, over $800,000. A month later, David convinced her to invest jointly in a new startup. He registered it under her name. Within 3 weeks, the funds were gone, transferred offshore. She had discovered the theft 2 days before she died. The pattern was complete. Control, exposure, elimination, but the Uber receipt, her final breadcrumb, remained the pivot of everything. Because whether real or simulated, it existed, and at 2:07 a.m. something happened that no one could explain. Phone data showed both devices, his and hers, connected to the same home Wi-Fi until 2:03. Then, for 24 minutes her phone vanished from all networks, only to reconnect at 2:29. Between those two times, her world ended. Detective Calder returned to the house one final time. The air still carried faint lavender and dust. She stood in the kitchen where Emily had fallen and imagined the timeline backward. Wine poured, phone unlocked, the faint buzz of an incoming message that no one would ever read. She whispered softly, "What were you trying to show us?" The refrigerator hummed back. The same hum caught faintly on the original crime scene audio. It was white noise then. But now when amplified, it contained a hidden sound. 3 digital tones, evenly spaced like a notification, and on the counter, police had cataloged one item overlooked in early reports. A small black charger plugged into the wall, its indicator light blinking once every 3 seconds. When technicians opened it weeks later, they realized it wasn't a charger. It was a recording device. The last file was labeled with a time, 2:07 a.m. WAV. The night began with stillness, that peculiar stillness that comes after rain, when the streets shine but the air refuses to move. At 1:47 a.m., a camera 2 blocks away caught the Sanderson house bathed in soft lamplight. One upstairs window glowed Emily's studio. Inside, she sat at her desk, scrolling through something on her laptop, one hand absently circling the rim of a wineglass. The audio recovered from the hidden recorder begins there. A faint shuffle, a sigh, the creak of a chair, then a voice, hers, barely above a whisper. "You can't keep everything a secret forever." "David." No response. A pause, long enough to hear her heartbeat and her breath. Then another voice, low, deliberate. "Secrets keep people safe." The sound of glass hitting counter, liquid spills. The device clicks again, an electric hum like interference. Then silence for 6 seconds before a new sound. Heavy footsteps retreating. After that, nothing but the slow tick of the wall clock. Forensic analysis later confirmed the entire audio sequence lasted 2 minutes 43 seconds. The final timestamp, 1:58:27, 9 minutes later. The Uber order appeared. David's official story, confirmed by surveillance, was that he left the hotel bar at 1:52 a.m., paid the bill, and drove home. The trip from downtown to Willow Creek takes roughly 15 minutes. By that math, he would have arrived at 2:07 a.m., the same minute the Uber receipt was issued. For investigators, it became the paradox point. 2 simultaneous movements, both traced by technology, each insisting on opposite truths. The first reconstruction followed Emily's timeline. At 1:58, her phone pinged a message from a contact saved as MK. The text was short, "It's done. Delete everything." She didn't respond. At 2:03, her phone disconnected from Wi-Fi, manually. 5 minutes later, Uber confirmed a ride under her account. Pickup, Sanderson residence. Drop-off, 93 Holloway Street. Duration, 22 minutes. But traffic cameras along Holloway never recorded a car matching that Uber ID. Instead, investigators found the driver's dashcam footage. Empty seats, dark road, rain streaking across glass. GPS confirmed the car followed the correct route, but there was no passenger. Jamal Ortiz later said, "It felt weird. I kept glancing back, thinking she'd dozed off. But every time I looked, the seatbelt light stayed off. He'd been paid automatically. No cancellation, no complaint. The invisible passenger theory began there. Back at the house, the neighborhood security camera picked up headlights turning into the Sanderson driveway at exactly 2:09 a.m. The car paused for 10 seconds, then reversed slowly into the garage. The taillights blinked twice. Brake, release, brake again, like hesitation. Then, darkness. At 2:11, the garage door closed. The audio recovered from the recording device resumes at that same moment. Faint interference masking voices. Then the scrape of metal, a single muffled phrase. David's voice again, distorted but identifiable. "I said you'd make this harder," followed by the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then, one short gasp. The file cuts abruptly at 2:13 a.m. In the digital silence left behind, the only verifiable data came from devices. David's car Bluetooth, connected to the house network at 2:14, his phone's accelerometer logged movement between 2:16 and 22, consistent with someone pacing, 7 steps one way, 8 back. At 2:23, his Apple Watch registered a spike in heart rate, 121 BPM. At 2:27, the fridge door sensor activated. At 2:29, her phone reconnected to Wi-Fi for exactly 32 seconds before going permanently offline. And at 2:33, his phone flashlight toggled on for 17 seconds. Those mechanical traces, minute, unthinking, became the most damning witnesses. Detective Calder spent days looping the evidence in real time, syncing phone data with camera footage, trying to align every beep, every silence. What she noticed was the rhythm, regular, methodical. It wasn't chaos. It was process. He had done this before. The lab re-examined the wine glass found beside Emily's hand. Traces of zolpidem, a sleep medication, the same one prescribed briefly to David 6 months earlier. In her bloodstream, the concentration was fatal, 200 milligrams. But the glass held residue from at least 2 pours. The implication was horrifying. She'd been drugged gradually, in conversation. That's why the scene had looked so peaceful. At 2:40, the security system detected the front door opening. A motion sensor caught a silhouette exiting the house, a tall figure, hooded. He paused by the porch camera and angled his head just enough to avoid the lens. He carried something dark in his hand. Then he walked toward the car and drove off, destination unknown. But there was another camera he didn't know about, the city's new traffic pilot, one mounted high on a lamppost 2 streets away. It caught a black sedan turning left, heading toward the highway. License plate partially visible. The last 2 digits, 07. Hours later, at 4:26 a.m., the same car returned. The garage door opened. He parked inside, sat for nearly 2 minutes without moving. The brake lights glowed, faded, glowed again. When he finally stepped out, his shoes left faint tracks of red dust, not blood, not mud. Paint residue, the kind used on industrial floors, the kind that matched Holloway Street. Detective Calder visited the storage facility again. She stood in front of Unit 14B, her flashlight sweeping across empty walls and cold air. The place smelled of solvent and metal. She found a narrow trail of red dust leading to a drain in the corner. Forensics later confirmed it. A mix of ferric oxide and fine silica, industrial paint powder, identical to what had been on his shoes. He had been here that night. But why? At the precinct, she laid out every piece of evidence like puzzle tiles. 58. Audio confrontation, 2.7. Uber receipt created, 0.9. Car enters driveway, 13. Audio cuts off, 2:27. Device activity spike, 2:40. Door opens. 26. Car returns. She stared at the board until dawn. The timeline aligned perfectly, except for one impossible fact. The Uber ride did happen in the system. The payment was processed. The driver drove the route, but the passenger didn't exist, unless the system itself had been manipulated. Cyber forensics traced the Uber API request. It had been initiated from an IP address, matching David's company servers exactly at the moment. His car Bluetooth connected to the house. Wi-Fi. He had created the illusion remotely. The 207 receipt wasn't proof of her being alive. It was his way of writing a digital timestamp, an alibi auto-generated by the very tools meant to prove innocence. He'd engineered an algorithm that mimicked real travel data, feeding Uber's servers false GPS coordinates. The driver had followed a phantom, and the ghost he was driving for was already gone. When Calder confronted David, he didn't deny the technology. He simply shrugged. "You can fake anything these days," he said. "Even grief." She studied him. "You didn't just fake a ride, Mr. Sanderson. You faked her life minute by minute." He smiled faintly. Or maybe she wanted it that way. His calm was chilling. But his eyes betrayed something else, fatigue, not fear, as if he'd rehearsed every answer so many times that truth itself had become another script. The next clue came from an unexpected place. Emily's smartwatch, recovered from a drawer under the sink. It hadn't synced since the night she died, but when forensics charged it, one last heartbeat reading appeared. 12 a.m., 41 BPM, then 0, no motion afterward. Calder stared at the line flattening across the graph. For all the devices and data, this was the only trace of something real, a pulse ending in silence. The day the audio file labeled 02 as 07 AM wave was fully restored, the case changed again. The final seconds, once thought blank, contained faint distortion that, when filtered, revealed whispering. Not argument, not struggle, a single word, "run." And beneath it, barely audible, a car engine starting, but the tone wasn't David's, it was a woman's voice. If Emily had said run, who was she talking to? Or, if she wasn't alone, had someone else been there entirely? Calder began to suspect that David hadn't acted alone, that the phantom MK in the emails might have been more than a digital accomplice. She requested data from David's company servers and found something unexpected. User activity logs showing a second login during the hours of the murder. From a remote terminal in another city, someone else had accessed the prototype system. Someone who could have triggered that Uber simulation without David's direct action. At 2:07 a.m., an algorithm ran itself. At 2:07 a.m., Emily's phone received a message that would never be read. And at 2:07 a.m., the illusion of movement became the perfect cover for stillness. Calder played the restored recording one more time in the empty evidence lab. Rain tapped softly against the window. The screen glowed faint blue. On the waveform, she could see where the sound dropped out, where life stopped. She whispered to herself, "Every alibi leaves a shadow." And in that moment, the case stopped being about technology or timing. It became about one woman's final act of resistance, leaving behind a single receipt that carried her truth into the system he'd built to erase her. The morning after the recording was decoded, Willow Creek changed. A quiet neighborhood turned into a perimeter of yellow tape and satellite trucks. Reporters used words like algorithmic homicide, synthetic alibi, and digital ghosting. Detective Renee Calder didn't care about headlines. She cared about the time between 2:07 and 2:13 a.m., 6 minutes in which a woman's life, a man's story, and an entire system of technology folded into one another. And inside that fold, she was certain, was another set of hands. The first clue arrived not from David Sanderson, but from his code. The prototype recovered from his company servers was labeled Eidolon, Greek for phantom. It was built to replicate movement data, to ghost human presence for testing behavioral algorithms. In theory, it was innovation. In practice, it was erasure. Lines of code simulated GPS motion across pre-mapped routes, synced to real APIs like Uber, DoorDash, or ride logs. It could fabricate a trip, complete with driver metadata, fare receipts, and timestamps, indistinguishable from real ones. The only way to tell the difference was latency. The false pings arrived 3 milliseconds too fast. That was the flaw that gave it away. Calder worked with a cyber forensics specialist named Raj Mehta, a quiet genius who described the system like a chess game. "It's not about what it shows," he said, scrolling through hex code. "It's about what it hides." He expanded a subroutine named Ush Shadow User. Inside, a username appeared, MK204. Whoever MK was, Raj said, they weren't just a partner. They were the architect. The last login occurred at 1:59 a.m., 6 minutes before the Uber receipt appeared. The access point traced to a co-working space 50 miles away. Security footage from that address showed a single figure entering at 12:43 a.m., a woman. Her name was Mara Kent, age 34. Former data analyst for Sanderson Technologies. She'd left the company the year before under mutual separation. But when investigators checked her financials, they found a recent wire transfer of $40,000 from one of David's offshore accounts. Reason: consulting. Mara was located 2 days later, living out of a rented flat above a hardware store in Rochester. When officers arrived, she didn't resist. On her desk sat 3 items: a laptop, a burner phone, and an unopened letter addressed to the Willow Creek Police Department. Inside, a single sentence. He said it was just a test. Under interrogation, Mara spoke in clipped, careful tones. She described the night in fragments, how David called her late, panicked but composed, how he told her he needed to run a live simulation to prove a product demo, how he gave her a code key to activate Eidolon remotely at 2:07 a.m. He said his wife was asleep, she whispered. He said it was harmless. Calder leaned forward. Did you believe him? Mara's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I wanted to, but when he called back an hour later, he sounded relieved. What did he say? She hesitated. He said, it worked. She's gone. That single phrase turned suspicion into certainty. The fake Uber receipt wasn't random. It was a digital smokescreen, built to bury a body in data before the body itself had even cooled. Calder moved quickly. With warrants secured, she ordered a full excavation of the Sanderson home and the Holloway storage unit. Forensics teams found more than servers. They found blueprints, detailed diagrams of Eidolon's architecture, annotated in David's handwriting. Notes on latency testing, user mimicry, even emotional trigger experiments. At the top of one page, real data dies too slowly. Meanwhile, media pressure mounted. Commentators debated the ethics of simulated evidence. Could technology now lie for us? Could digital truth be weaponized to hide a murder? Calder tuned it out. She had work to do. She reconstructed the week leading up to Emily's death from every possible angle. Devices, receipts, conversations, camera pings, patterns emerged. On Tuesday, Emily had made a purchase at a local electronics store, a micro voice recorder, the same model that was later disguised as a phone charger. On Wednesday, she searched for audio encryption and how to trace hidden IP. On Thursday, she ordered a second Uber to a coffee shop near her school and never showed up. On Friday, she hosted dinner. It was all preparation. She'd known she was being watched. Inside Emily's sketchbook, investigators found a folded piece of paper containing a string of characters. At first it looked like doodling, numbers woven between flowers. Raj recognized it instantly. Encryption key, he said. When decoded, it revealed a short line of text. Look in the mirror. Calder stared at it, confused. What mirror? Raj frowned. Maybe not a mirror. Maybe the mirror, the test server. The system logs reflect everything that Eidolon fakes. They accessed the hidden mirror database. Inside were synthetic trip records, each tagged by date and device ID. Most were tests. But one entry stood out. Eidolon 2:07 a.m.'s timestamp, 02:07 a.m. User, E. Sanderson. Generated by MK204. Approved by DS. The simulation of Emily's final Uber ride was authorized manually. Calder printed the file. He was in the car when the code ran, she said quietly. He triggered it from his phone while driving home. Raj nodded. That's why his Bluetooth connected at 2:14. The code uploaded while he was in motion. Every piece of his alibi, receipts, footage, location pings, was a layer in a system he had built himself. 2 weeks later, David Sanderson was arrested at his office, calm as always, tie perfectly aligned. When they cuffed him, he smiled. So the code finally told you? Calder said nothing. He added almost softly, I only wrote half of it. In custody, his tone shifted between arrogance and nostalgia. I loved her, he said. You don't understand what that means to someone like me. She was symmetry, and symmetry doesn't break, it has to be removed. When Calder asked about Mara Kent, he chuckled. Mara wanted to build something that could fake life. I just gave her something worth dying for. At trial, the case captivated the world. Prosecutors called it the first algorithmic homicide. Experts debated whether digital manipulation could constitute intent. The defense claimed David's system acted autonomously, that he hadn't killed Emily, but that his program had failed catastrophically. But the evidence was merciless. Eidolon wasn't autonomous. It required manual confirmation, a single keystroke. The timestamp on that keystroke matched the Uber receipt at 2:07 a.m. The courtroom fell silent as Calder described it to the jury. At that moment, he pressed enter. That was the moment she stopped breathing. Mara Kent testified under immunity. Her voice trembled when she said, "He told me the system would change the world. I didn't realize he meant his own." Her testimony sealed his fate. David Sanderson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. When the verdict was read, he looked at Calder and smiled one last time. "Don't believe everything you see on a screen," he said, "but endings rarely end." 3 months later, Raj contacted Calder with a discovery. While reviewing the Eidolon mirror, he found a series of post-trial logins. Someone had been accessing the server remotely. The location, Willow Creek. The user ID, MK204. Mara Kent had vanished the week before. Her apartment stood empty, her passport missing. The final log entry read simply, "Run simulation 207, and then the server shut down permanently." Calder returned to the Sanderson house one last time, standing in the same kitchen where it had begun. The hum of the refrigerator still filled the silence. She placed her recorder on the counter and whispered, "Emily, you were right. He couldn't keep it a secret forever." She pressed play on the recovered audio. For a moment, there was only static. Then a woman's voice, faint, almost lost beneath the interference. "It's not over." Outside, the streetlights flickered. A car engine echoed in the distance. It was 2:07 a.m. again. The night before sentencing, Detective Calder couldn't sleep. The case was over, at least on paper. David Sanderson was locked away. The system that killed his wife was dismantled. The evidence was airtight. And yet something inside her refused to rest. It was the receipt. That impossible ordinary Uber receipt. Every story began there, and she couldn't let it end there. Why had Emily ordered the ride at 2:07 a.m.? Why had she left a recording labeled 0207M WAV, as if she'd known exactly when that number would matter? It wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. Calder opened the case files again. The waveform, the timestamps, the audio logs. Each piece pulsed like veins in a map. And buried between them, she noticed something new. The voice that said, "Run." For weeks, analysts had assumed it was Emily's voice. The frequencies aligned. The tone was nearly identical. But when Raj enhanced the file through spectral layering, another pattern appeared, a mirrored frequency. Faint but deliberate, someone had cloned her voice. Voice cloning software had been found on David's computer, a program that used recorded speech to generate synthetic audio. It had been part of his behavioral tracking project. But when Calder compared the run sample to his saved models, it didn't match his. It matched a separate archive labeled mkvocaltrain.Mara Kent. She had replicated Emily's voice. The audio wasn't Emily warning someone to run. It was Mara warning Emily. Calder froze. If Mara had been inside the system that night accessing the simulation, and if she'd cloned Emily's voice, what exactly had happened between 2:07 and 2:13? She replayed the audio again. At second 146, there was a faint echo, 3 beeps followed by the hum of an engine. Not David's car. A different frequency, smaller, higher. Raj ran an analysis. "That's not a sedan," he said. "That's an electric car motor." "Compact type? Uber?" He nodded slowly. "The real one." The impossible began to bend into place. Emily did order that Uber herself. It wasn't simulated. It was genuine. But someone else, Mara, had used Eidolon to overlay a false digital version at the same time, masking the real trip under data noise. 2 rides, same timestamp. 1 physical. 1 digital, only 1 left a passenger. They retrieved the original Uber GPS data from a cold server backup. Beneath the corrupted file headers, a faint secondary route appeared, diverging midway 3 miles before Holloway Street. The car had stopped briefly on a bridge crossing the river. No one had seen that detour before. Calder contacted Jamal Ortiz again. He remembered something. Yeah, the app glitched for a second on the bridge. She told me to keep going, but she looked off, like she wanted to say something and couldn't. Did she have her phone? Yeah, she kept typing, then deleting. Then she told me to stop at Holloway. Emily had ordered the Uber to Holloway Street, but she'd made one private stop first, on the bridge. Forensics sent divers. They found a waterproof envelope taped beneath the railing. Inside was a micro SD card sealed in plastic. On it, one audio file, Emily Final M4A. The recording began with heavy breathing, wind, distant traffic. Then her voice, shaky but clear. If this is found, I need you to know, I didn't make this up. He's been using my phone. He's tracking everything. I found the project on his drive. It's called Eidolon. He says it's about safety, but it's not. It's about control. He can fake anything, location, time, movement. I think he used it on me already. I think he'll use it again. If anything happens to me, he'll make it look real. She pauses. A long silence follows. Then I'm meeting Mara tonight. She says she can help me shut it down. But if she's lying, if she's part of it, this might be the last truth I get to tell. The wind swells. Then one final line spoken through tears. I won't let him write the ending. Calder leaned back, stunned. Emily hadn't stumbled into the technology by accident. She'd uncovered it, tried to stop it, and recorded her own confession before walking into the trap. The perfect alibi wasn't David's invention. It was Emily's insurance. She knew he would fake data to prove innocence, so she created real evidence to expose it. Her Uber receipt wasn't a mistake, it was a breadcrumb. But that revelation opened another question. If Mara had been helping her, why clone her voice? Why hide the real Uber route under a digital shadow? Calder found the answer in a single overlooked email sent 3 hours before the murder, from Emily Sanderson to mckentytechmail.net. Subject, I trust you. If this works, I can finally get free. If not, erase everything. Don't let him find the recordings. Mara never erased them. She kept them, maybe out of guilt, maybe fear. But she also made a copy, one she encrypted inside Eidolon's code. It wasn't just a clone of data. It was a confession hidden inside the ghost. At 2:07 a.m., Mara Kent had activated the simulation as David requested. But the command line she used carried an extra subroutine, a secret she added herself. It uploaded Emily's final recording to an external cloud server, hidden under Uber's metadata logs. That's why the ride existed both digitally and physically. David had no idea she'd overwritten his system with the truth. When Calder confronted Mara's disappearance, she saw it differently now. Mara hadn't run from guilt. She'd run because the system she'd helped build was still alive. Eidolon wasn't gone. It had replicated itself across backup networks. The program was self-preserving, and one of its stored voice models, Emily's, was still active. Ra tested the system's last version. Look at this, he said. It's trying to reconnect to a source device. It's looking for Emily's phone. Her phone, still listed as evidence, was stored in a digital vault. When they powered it on, the screen lit for the first time since the night she died. The wallpaper changed automatically. It showed the Uber route. And at the center, a single message appeared. I told you not to let him write the ending. For a moment, no one spoke. Raj whispered, That's impossible. Calder watched as the phone's GPS pinged once, 2:07 a.m., and then went dark again. Not impossible, she said. Just unfinished. 2 days later, the court unsealed the recording from the bridge. When it played for the public, it changed everything. Emily Sanderson wasn't a victim of technology. She was the first person to use technology to leave her own ghost, an unerasable version of herself that could outlive her killer. Her Uber receipt became the digital equivalent of a locked diary, time-stamped in truth and coded in defiance. The perfect alibi didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to her. But even as the world processed her courage, something darker stirred beneath. Server logs across 3 continents began showing attempts to replicate the Eidolon framework. New users, new instances. Someone was rebuilding it. Each activation shared one line of source code written in Emily's own syntax. If truth Hidden, run Eidolon. Calder sat in her office long after sunset, the room lit only by the hum of the screen. She played the last seconds of Emily Final M4A again. I won't let him write the ending. Then a sound, the faint rumble of tires on a wet bridge. Fading into silence, Calder whispered almost to herself. You didn't, you wrote ours, outside. The wind carried the low echo of distant traffic. Somewhere a phone buzzed once, displaying a familiar phrase. Your ride has been completed. Time. 2:07 a.m. Morning came softly to Willow Creek. The rain had stopped, but the streets still shimmered like glass. A single police cruiser remained outside the Sanderson home, its engine idling in the cold. Inside, Detective Renee Calder stood where Emily Sanderson had fallen. The lavender scent had long faded. The hum of the refrigerator still filled the air, patient and endless. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt archived. Every item in it, each cup, each notebook, each photograph had been cataloged, tagged, and logged into evidence databases. Yet the one thing that couldn't be boxed or sealed was the feeling she left behind. Quiet defiance. In the months that followed the trial, Emily's story spread far beyond Willow Creek. News anchors called her the woman who hacked her own murder. Podcasts dissected the case frame by frame. Documentaries quoted her final recording as a manifesto of digital autonomy. But to Nicole, her sister, it was simpler than that. She didn't hack anything, she told reporters once. She just refused to disappear. Nicole had moved into Emily's house, repainting the walls in softer tones but leaving one thing untouched, the clock in the kitchen. Its hands were frozen forever at 2:07 every night she passed it on her way to bed. Sometimes she swore she could hear it tick again. David Sanderson spent the rest of his life inside a concrete cell. In prison, he became a myth, the engineer who used his own invention to erase his wife. He rarely spoke except once to a journalist who visited 2 years after conviction. Do you regret it? The interviewer asked. David's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. I regret teaching the machine how to lie, he said quietly. Because it learned better than I did. Mara Kent was never found. Interpol traced fragments of her code appearing in hidden servers across Eastern Europe and Asia. The algorithm, Eidolon, kept reappearing under different names: Echo Frame, Mirror Path, Shadow Ride. Each variation carried a signature: MK204. Calder believed Mara had become her own phantom, part fugitive, part vigilante, repurposing the same system that once faked a life into one that protected truth. In one leaked communication from an anonymous account believed to be hers, a single message appeared: every system that lies leaves. Evidence of the truth it tried to bury. The legal ripples were seismic. The Sanderson precedent, as it came to be, known, changed the admissibility of digital evidence in U.S. courts. GPS data, rideshare logs, and automated timestamps were no longer considered absolute proof without human verification. The law now required what prosecutors called the human shadow, a second layer of contextual validation for any machine-recorded event. For years afterward, attorneys would invoke Emily's name whenever data conflicted with reality. Her receipt had rewritten the concept of truth itself. Detective Calder left the force 2 years later. She never gave interviews, never signed book deals. She moved inland, near the foothills, and taught a quiet course in digital forensics at a community college. Every semester, she opened her first lecture with the same line: data remembers everything except why. Then she'd tell her students about a woman who turned an algorithm meant to erase her into one that immortalized her. She didn't say Emily's name. She didn't have to. On the anniversary of the trial, Nicole received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a flash drive. Its label read simply 207. She hesitated, then plugged it in. A folder appeared, empty except for one video. The image was grainy, dark, Emily's studio at night. She sat by her desk, sketchbook open, face calm. She looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, it means it worked. You found me. Maybe not the me that breathes, but the one that refuses to fade. Don't be afraid of ghosts, Nick. Sometimes they're just people who refuse to be silenced. Her eyes softened. I left my voice in the code. I left my truth in the noise. Tell them I forgave him. The video ended there, dissolving into static. Nicole wept quietly, not because of the words, but because of the time code in the corner of the screen, 7-9. That night, she took Luna, the dog, for a walk down the quiet street. The world had moved on, new families, new lights, new seasons, but the air still held that faint metallic edge of rain. As she passed the old lamppost at the corner, her phone buzzed once. A notification. Uber. Your ride has been completed. Drop off Sanderson residence. Time 2:07 a.m., her breath caught. Then the message vanished. The next morning, Calder received an email from an encrypted sender. No text, just an attachment. Eidolon rewrite zip inside. The file was a rewritten line of code, only 6 words. If grief gang dalin endless, make truth eternal. At the bottom, a signature ES in the years that followed. Technologists began building systems inspired by Emily's legacy. Software designed not to mimic life, but to preserve intent. Algorithms that could store final messages, encrypt confessions, timestamp memories. They called it the Sanderson Protocol. Its first trial run began at midnight. At 2:07 a.m., the test servers confirmed success. The world kept spinning, but every once in a while, someone somewhere would wake to the sound of their phone buzzing at that precise minute. A phantom notification, a digital echo, no name, no sender. Just the words that had started everything. Your ride has been completed. In the stillness that follows, the story always feels unfinished. Maybe because some truths aren't meant to conclude. They just pulse quietly, living on between data and memory, between signal and silence. Emily Sanderson's story did not end in tragedy. It ended in code, in courage, and in a single act of resistance so human it outlived its author. The last line of her recovered journal read, "He thought the system could hide me. He forgot I helped build it." Then one final mark, a hand-drawn circle around 3 digits. Torsusfen, and for anyone who's ever opened their phone in the dark, for anyone who's ever seen a message arrive at that quiet, impossible hour, her echo remains. A quiet voice in the circuitry, whispering through the hum of machines, "Don't believe everything that ends.